All right, everyone. It is the top of the hour, and we are going to get started here. We've got a lot of exciting information to go over today. My name is Eric Rodell. I'm the Industry Engagement Manager here at People4Bikes. Today, we're going to be running through our new Business Intelligence Hub and what People4Bikes is doing to help give insights on the trends to guide the bike industry. As always, we want to thank our coalition members that help fund our work. We could not do this great work and this broad work that we do without your support. If you're interested in becoming a People4Bikes member, please do reach out to me at ericb@peopleforbikes.org, and we'll get you plugged into the membership flow process. This is at least one familiar face for you here at the top of the screen. We have Jennifer Baldry joining us today and Patrick Hogan. And now I will just hand things off to Jennifer to give us a brief introduction of both her and Patrick.
Hey, thanks so much, Brody. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. I'm Jennifer Baldry. I'm the Chief Research Advisor for PFB and Applied Innovation Leader at Naxion. I've been working on market intelligence and the bike industry for quite a while now. I know a lot of you on the attendee list, so good to see all of your names. So I first started providing market intelligence to the bike industry at Leisure Trends, where I managed the Consumer Insights division of the company. Did the same kind of thing at Breakaway Research Group and transitioned into People4Bikes, where I've been partnered for, the better part of the last 10 years or so. But before we get started, I really want to introduce everyone to Patrick Hogan. Patrick is People4Bikes' new industry research manager. He comes to us from the hook and bullet industry, where he spent the last several years doing research at Southwick Associates. For those of you who are familiar with the Outdoor Industry Association's Outdoor Rec Economy Report, Patrick worked on that while he was at Southwick. But not only does he have this super impressive research skill set, he also does have a history in the bike industry. His first job at age 13 was at Richardson Bike Mart in Dallas. I'm sure he can tell you a little bit about that next time we're all together in person. But Patrick's been really instrumental in helping to launch, maintain, and build the Business Intelligence Hub that we're going to talk about today. So please join me in welcoming Patrick to the bike industry. So the agenda for today is pretty clear. I'm going to start by providing you, and Brody, if you want to go to the next slide, that would be awesome. I'm going to start by providing you a little bit of background information on the People4Bikes Business Intelligence Hub, and then I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to go through each of our metrics in detail, what each can do, and then we'll talk briefly about next steps. So in terms of kind of the big background and vision, I think for a long time the bike industry has really been needing faster and more actionable market intelligence. Certainly all the way back to my days at Leisure Trends, I've been hearing about how we need more and we need it faster. As the COVID-19 pandemic hit us and accelerated, I think that need became even more urgent, and we were hearing from industry leaders how much they needed kind of quick and better information, because historic metrics can't really guide us through these times. We don't really know what's going to happen next. So the PFB Research and Stats Subcommittee that was created when People4Bikes merged with the BPSA last July is really uniquely positioned to provide exactly that. The business intelligence to help guide the industry through this crisis and beyond. And that's really how the idea and the Business Intelligence Hub was born. And just so everybody's on the same page, I think internally we're kind of calling it just the Hub, because Business Intelligence Hub is such a mouthful. So the Hub represents a significant step in the direction of People4Bikes' vision, and Tim Blumenthal in particular, his vision of a real-time data feed piped straight into PFB headquarters that tells us how many people are riding bikes in the US. But the Hub goes beyond just bicycle riding and also includes metrics of retail sales and consumer attitudes and perceptions. It's important also to note that the Hub is really a first step, and you'll see as we go through it, there are lots more we could do, and we'll talk about this in next steps in terms of hopefully improving the actionability of the data we're providing, improving the metrics, maybe adding new metrics, and that sort of thing. But before I turn it over to Patrick to give us a little more information on those metrics, I really need to thank our industry supporters who provided above and beyond funding for the Business Intelligence Hub: Baldry, Shimano, Bosch, Smartytailing, SRAM, and Trek. If not for the extra funding provided by these companies, we could not have built the hub. So big thanks to these folks. I'd also like to thank our data partners who are helping us to provide really good data. Without them, we would also not have much to provide. That's EcoCounter, an outdoor foundation, Rails to Trails Conservancy, RideSpot, Smartytailing, and Retail Toolkit. So thanks to everybody for helping make the hub possible. We really appreciate that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to walk us through each of our metrics, starting with ridership. Patrick?
Perfect. Thanks, Jennifer. So first, we're going to go through the ridership metrics provided on the hub. We've gathered ridership data from 4 sources listed at the bottom here: EcoCounter, Outdoor Foundation, Rails to Trails Conservancy, and PeopleForBikes RideSpot. So we offer many different measures because we understand that there are different audiences making use of these data and reading the hub, and we want to cater to as diverse of a group as possible. Each of these data partners provide us with a different measure of ridership, and as such, the graphs are presented in a slightly different manner. So we're going to quickly go through each to better understand how we can use these findings. The first one is EcoCounter. EcoCounter measures ridership using a representative sample of automated counters across the US to record the number of bike trips taking place in urban areas. So the figures here represent the percent change between daily 2020 counts and the relevant day of the week and month from 2019. So what that means is that today, Wednesday, June the 24th, 2020 will be compared to Wednesdays in June of 2019. And that helps normalize spikes during the weekend so that when we're looking at a date that's a weekend in 2020, we're not comparing it to a weekday in 2019 and misrepresenting any increase that might be inflated due to weekdays versus weekends. So an example of how to read this graph would be on Saturday, June the 13th, there were 40% more bicycles counted by EcoCounter than there were on Saturdays in June of 2019.
And Patrick, this is Jennifer. I just might add to that, when we look at the average change since March of 2020, so essentially since the pandemic, officially hit the US, EcoCounter is observing about an average of 20% increase in ridership day over day.
Yes, perfect. Thanks for bringing that up. The next metric that we provide is Outdoor Foundation data. So as a part of the Physical Activity Council, the Outdoor Foundation tracks participation in a variety of outdoor activities, including road riding and riding on paved surfaces, mountain biking, unpaved surfaces, BMX riding, riding stationary bikes, and a measure of all riding, which is regardless of the type of riding, how many individuals ages 6 and older in America are participating in riding bicycles. So this study provides weekly estimates of the percent of Americans ages 6 and older who participate in each type of bicycling. These estimates represent the change in a 12-month participation rate measured in percentage points reported weekly. So what that means is every week we catalog 30 days worth of surveys, each of which asks about the previous 12 months of activity. So this is on a much larger scale than our other participation metrics. This helps us understand on a zoomed out level what's happening in cycling participation across the US. These figures that are reported here are reported in percentage points so that we see in, for the measure of June 15th, road riding increased by 1.5 percentage points compared to the same week in 2019. So that could be an increase of, I believe it was 18.5 to 20% of Americans ages 6 and older riding bikes. And since March, the average increase in percentage points that the Outdoor Foundation has measured for all riding is a 2% increase.
Thanks, Patrick. And I would just add to that, that when we look at those changes, you'll see that for Outdoor Foundation, right, there's not as big of a growth as we're seeing in some of our other metrics. And there are a couple reasons for that. When we compare to, say, Eco Counter, which is counting the number of bike trips that are passing over those automated Eco Counters, Outdoor Foundation is measuring the number of people who self-report having ridden a bike in the last 12 months. So there are a couple things going on there with the Outdoor Foundation, and that is we're rolling over 4 weeks to get a big enough sample, and we're asking about a 12-month participation period. So those average changes compared to 2019 are going to be kind of smoothed out or smaller in the Outdoor Foundation data than in other data sources.
That's exactly right. That's an important distinction. I'm glad you brought that up. That is the only metric that we have that measures individuals instead of measuring rides. So our next data source, Rails to Trails Conservancy, is the nation's largest trails and active transportation advocacy organization. And as a part of their research, they analyze user counts on rail trails, which are multi-purpose public paths created from former railroad corridors in diverse geographic regions across the country. So these figures represent the percent change in the number of bicycle trips recorded by these bicycle-specific counters located on rail trails across the US. And this is comparing 2020 to the average number of rides recorded for that same week in 2019. So for the first week of June 1st, there were 48% more bicycle trips counted on rail trails than the same week in 2019. And we mentioned that there are a bunch of different measures of ridership presented on the hub. Each of these measures is going to cater to a little bit of a different audience. So we would expect those riding these rail trails to maybe be a little bit older, maybe a little more affluent, those who are a little more risk averse and would rather ride on a rail trail than on a bike lane that's shared with vehicles where they might encounter traffic, that sort of thing. Let's hit the next slide. Oh, there we go. The last ridership metric that we provide is RideSpot, which is PeopleForBikes' industry-wide campaign and technology tool, helping riders to find safe and appealing places to ride. So the data collected here helps us understand where our customers are riding, what they're riding, and how we might be able to incentivize them to ride more. The figures presented here represent the change in the number of rides by week in 2020 compared to the average number recorded for the same week in 2019. So again, this is rides and not riders. During the week of June 8th, 2020, there were 160% more rides being counted in the RideSpot app than the same week in 2019. And since March, since the onset of the pandemic, we've estimated an average increase of 118%. The next type of data we'll look at is retail sales trends. So we've gathered retail data from two sources, Smartytailing and Retail Toolkit, each of which presents a unique set of data in a slightly different manner. So we're going to walk through each of these sources again. The figures reported by Smartytailing represent the percent change in sales through independent bike dealer, or IBD, e-commerce websites in 2020 compared to the same month in 2019. Daily estimates of units and dollars for bikes and aftermarket products for the US and Canada are all presented separately. So there's going to be 4 graphs representing Smartytailing data on the hub. The one we're looking at here is US bike sales, units and dollars. According to Smartytailing, on June 21st of 2020, there was an increase of about 2,000% bicycle unit sales compared to average sales in June of 2019, sold through e-commerce sources. The next metric that we have here is the Retail Toolkit Sales Index, which shows relative change compared to 2019 in dollar sales and the sum of total transactions reported by participating independent bike dealers. The numbers presented by Retail Toolkit represent the percent change in total dollar sales, number of transactions, and foot traffic measured in 2020 compared to the relevant day of the same week in 2019. So similar to EcoCounter, this will normalize any fluctuations across weekdays and weekends so that we're looking at the relevant day of the week from the previous year. This being the case, though, there are a couple nuances here that we want to look at. For instance, Easter 2020 fell on a different day than Easter 2019. So in mid-April, we see a sharp decline in sales April 12th because retail locations were closed on Easter Sunday. And similarly, a sharp increase a few days later on the date which Easter 2019 occurred. So just a couple things to keep in mind. As we look at all of these graphs, they're presented in their static form here, but on the Business Intelligence Hub itself, you can hover over these data points and see the date and the measure for each of these metrics. The last type of data that we'll discuss is consumer insights, and this is, to me, absolutely the most exciting part of the Business Intelligence Hub. Trends in ridership and retail can tell us what has happened, and we can approach understanding a real-time metric of what is happening, but they don't tell us why it's happening, and they don't tell us what we would expect to happen. So every week, People4Bikes is conducting surveys to supplement the data available on the hub and help us learn more about how ridership is changing in response to COVID-19. We have two different surveys that we're fielding as a result of this. The first of which is a general population survey of about 1,000 American adults, ages 18 and older, that are representative of the US based on census data in terms of age, income, so forth, so on. These topics change week to week and range from broad lifestyle questions to specific questions about bicycle purchase decisions. So the example that I've presented here asked those who purchased recently, as well as those who intend to purchase within the next 3 months, how COVID-19 affected their decision to purchase. We also understand in this same section on the Business Intelligence Hub how they intend to make that purchase. We saw that there was an increase in online sales in the most recent 3 months worth of purchases. Those who expect to purchase in the next 3 months, how does their intent to purchase, or where do they intend to purchase that bike? Do they intend to purchase it straight from the manufacturer and ship to their house, or would they rather go to a brick and mortar store and purchase it from a locally owned shop? The next survey is a survey of People4Bikes supporters. So there are 1.4 million Americans who have signed the pledge for better biking and provided us their email addresses and opted into taking surveys. Every week or every other week, we'll survey a quarter of that total supporter base to understand how avid riders are changing their participation during this unique time and how their purchases might be changing as well. So what we have here is the results of a survey asking about those who commute to work or commute for transportation purposes to get from point A to point B, as well as those who are riding for recreation, how their riding has changed since the onset of stay-at-home orders, social distancing guidelines, and similar restrictions. When we understand how their riding has changed, we can ask them how they anticipate their riding might resume once all of these restrictions are lifted or eased. And so we can get a better sense of what's happening right now, this unique change in participation that we're seeing. Is this something that we would expect to sustain into the future? If not, is there anything that we can do to help nudge them to participate more? Or is there anything for those who expect to participate more that we can do to support them in their pursuit of riding more? As we field these surveys every week, we're updating the Business Intelligence Hub. So every week that Consumer Insights page will look a little bit different. So in order to make these data available to everybody, we have an archive of each week's Business Intelligence Hub Consumer Insights page available here for a PDF download, so that if there's any question that's of interest to you that you saw a couple of weeks ago, you think you might be able to use those data in a meaningful way, you can go download that PDF if there's anything that you need in real time from the Business Intelligence Hub now, most of these graphs have a CSV downloadable data source where you can bring those data down and see what we're seeing. If you wanted to look at, we've been describing average changes since March. If you want to look at average change since April, or maybe there's a different date that's important to you, you can download those data yourself to make use of them. Next steps. So the Business Intelligence Hub is a first step. This is our best effort to provide the industry with data that we think will be useful. The Intelligence Hub looks different now than it did when we first launched it about 4 weeks ago, and it'll likely look different 4 weeks from now. And a lot of that is dependent on your feedback. Like I said, we've provided this hub based on what we think the industry will find useful, and we would, as you use this tool, I hope you'll feel free to send us your feedback. My email address is provided on this next slide here. If there's anything that you think could be added to make this more useful, could be presented in a different manner, our goal is to make these actionable insights and useful data. So please let us know if there's anything that we can do to better achieve that goal. And Jennifer, I'll throw it back to you if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. We are looking for feedback to improve what's already there, but I think we're also looking for feedback about other metrics that might be valuable. If you know of something that's available, you know, paying for data is always difficult for a nonprofit who's trying to get better bike infrastructure and better places to ride on the ground all over the country. But we are open to looking at, you know, what would be some other metrics that we could use to supplement what we have. And I think the other thing that I'm thinking a lot about and thinking about every day is how to take the data and start delivering better insights around it. I mean, you can look at those charts and you can look at those graphs, but maybe or maybe not, you actually see what some of our industry leaders or what I see or what Patrick sees. And I'll use Retail Toolkit as an example. I'm just fascinated by that slide because it has historically been the case that, you know, foot traffic and transactions and total dollar sales are all pretty well related. And what we see is that since the shutdown, and this is not a surprise, right? But since the shutdown, the dollars are up at a much greater rate than the transactions are up, and foot traffic is obviously way down. A lot of retailers are limited hours or limited people in the shop, or you know, there are other kinds of restrictions in place. So it's not necessarily surprising. But I think what we're seeing in that data is that people are going to bike shops now to buy, not to shop necessarily. They're spending a lot more per visit because they're there strategically. And, you know, it'll be super interesting to see how that evolves as restrictions start to lift and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for insights, and you know, I'm really interested in how to provide those, how often people want to hear from us around stuff like that. So, you know, that kind of feedback is welcome too. And we can probably go to the next slide.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you both for that very comprehensive presentation. This is a really great tool that's going to help our industry move forward with informed data decisions. Now for questions. Everyone, if you haven't been with us before, please do type your questions into that question box on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we already have a few in the queue here, so we'll get right started with them. From Luis, for the ridership trends from the Outdoor Foundation slide, is the road metric inclusive of gravel?
I can jump in on that one, Patrick.
Sure.
So the way the question is worded is, the question literally is, in the last 12 months, how many days have you participated in the following? And so the options are road riding, riding on a paved surface, mountain biking / riding on an unpaved surface, and BMX. My guess is that most people who ride gravel would call that an unpaved surface and actually put it into the mountain bike / unpaved surface category as opposed to the road category.
Thank you for that. Next one from our friend Steven over at Bosch. Is it possible to see month-by-month retail data or only day by day?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's something I've thought about adding in there. If that's something that would be helpful to our audience, doing a month by month or like a 30-day rolling average, I think would be a great way to better understand, kind of smoothing out some of that volatility, better see some of these trends that are happening. So I'm glad that someone else thought that that would be useful. That validates my brainstorming here.
Things like that help us improve the tools, so thank you very much for that. Question about service here. Are those service dollars, when we're doing adjustments and fixing broken parts on bikes, are those taken out of the daily spend, or is that all rolled up into one? Can we analyze that separately?
I'm going to let you, Jennifer, take that one, I think.
Sure. So I'm assuming that we're talking about the retail toolkit data where we're talking about total dollars through IBD POS systems. Right now, we don't have any breakouts for that data, right? It's just the total dollars. So service is included in that. Our partners at Retail Toolkit, and I can't thank them and Smartytailing enough, have volunteered to provide that data to People4Bikes members free of cost to help us move forward through the crisis. I imagine that there are all kinds of opportunities to break out data, but I'm not sure that our partners can sort of afford to do that for free. So it's super great feedback. I appreciate it. And we will certainly be thinking about where and how we can break things out moving forward.
And this is probably a similar question to that by disaggregating the data for race, gender, and socioeconomic status. Those all go into that answer I believe you just gave.
Well, I'm going to assume, this Jennifer, I'm going to assume that that is mostly about the ridership data. The retail sales data, there's no way that I'm aware of to do that. Most retailers aren't collecting that kind of data on their customers as they're coming in the door. But as far as the ridership data goes, so for Eco-Counter and Rails to Trails, there's no way to really do that because that's just the number of bike trips that happen that cross those Eco-Counter automated counter lines. So there's no way to really know anything about the people. The Outdoor Foundation study collects about 1,500 interviews. I think it's per month, but I'd have to look back at that to double check.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, so across a 12-month period, we can certainly do some kind of disaggregation or some kind of demographic analysis, but we don't have the sample size on a week-to-week basis to really look at that. That is, I mean, especially in, with current conditions, especially with issues around social justice, we're thinking a lot about who's riding, who's increasing riding, what are the barriers for different kinds of people. And those are topics we can take on in our general population and our grassroots Army surveys for sure. And I think, Patrick, I'll let you jump in because I think we're doing some of that already.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, we have that in the consumer insights portion of ours, which I mentioned we have a lot of freedom to be able to ask these two, not necessarily discrete audiences, the general population and our more avid riders, kind of have a lot of freedom to ask them whatever we'd like. So if there are questions that you have, feel free to shoot them to me too. And that's not necessarily saying that we'd be able to include them, but like I said, we're aiming to make this tool as useful as it could be. And if there's something that we can ask our audiences, I'd love to know what that might be.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of our best opportunities for providing value is to get some feedback from all of you around what it is you need to know. And hopefully we can find ways to address that, if not through those two surveys, from other ways.
So we have 3 more questions here, and we'll go a little bit over to get these 3 in. If you can stick with us, please do. If not, we will send out a recording right after this webinar as soon as we can get it uploaded. So the first and our last 3, do we have visibility and purpose of riding? So are we separating that into commute, recreational?
That's a great question. So the Outdoor Foundation study is all recreational riding for sure. I think it's reasonable to assume that the rails to trails riding is recreational. Generally, people don't use rail trails to commute, although there are certainly exceptions to that. It's the eco counter data where we have the least visibility into that, I think. So the eco counter data are from counters that are installed across the country. It's a regional representation, but they're all in urban areas is the key. And so to the degree that there is commuting going on in urban areas versus rec riding, it could be capturing that commute riding there. We are working with EcoCounter right now to figure out if there are ways that we can designate specific counters that are recording more recreation versus commuting or transportation trips to see if we can break that out. And then I would say, again, back to our general population and grassroots Army surveys, those are places where we can definitely get insight on that.
And are there barriers and motivations / catalyst captured for new riders? Basically, what are the reasons new people are joining?
Great question. That's something that we are looking to ask in our next general population survey is kind of what drove you to begin participating in cycling during this time. You know, this is a time when a couple of constraints are eased, when individuals have a little bit more free time. Maybe they're participating in fewer activities. They're spending less time taking their kids to after school activities. And there seems to be some impetus for them taking up bicycling. What was it that nudged them into participating, and how can we support them as they become cyclists and as they make these purchases and become ingrained in this culture?
And our last question here, is there customer feedback collected on ridership beyond 3 months? So carrying through with the habit and behavior.
I'm not sure. Are we talking about, is there historic data looking back further than 3 months, or is there data projecting their anticipated? Well, I'll answer it both ways. We have a lot of data that a few of these data sources began January 1st. One of them began February. Most of what we're presenting, I believe, began in March, just because that's kind of the scope of this Business Intelligence Hub, is understanding how participation has changed during COVID. We asked a question of our general population, how they expected to participate 3 months out. We could ask about within the next year or the next 2 years, but as we extend that timeline, the reliability of that answer kind of wanes a little bit. Everyone's a little bit more optimistic when they respond to a survey anyway. So what we've done is just ask about the next 3 months. Do you think that you're going to continue participating? You know, I'm very likely to, I'm somewhat likely to, so forth and so on. But this is something that we'll continue to track. This project will extend on through the end of this year, and we'll maintain it for as long as we have funding. So if there's a way that we can anticipate ridership moving into the future, we'll continue to provide that.
All right, I think that's all the time that we have for today. If we didn't get to your question during the question section, we will respond to you through email. Thank you all so much for being with us again today, and we'll see you on the next webinar.